My name is Daniel Ross. I was 52, a retired master electrician in Clearwater Lake, Missouri, and on the morning the HOA president kicked my cabin door off its hinges, I was sitting 3 feet from the state's attorney general. The door blew inward with a crack like a rifle shot. Splinters flew. Designer heels clacked over broken glass. Delilah Cromwell, 58. Pearl white Escalade with vanity plates that read, Rule 1 charged in with a phone held high, and 2 inspectors at her flanks in matching windbreakers stitched with knockoff badges. One fumbled a cheap handheld thermometer like it was crime scene tech. The other shouldered a clipboard and started filming my walls, as if my grandfather's photographs were evidence of a felony. Community safety action in progress. Delilah shouted to her live audience, panning her camera past my boots and the wood stove. Hundreds of hearts and angry faces bubbled across her screen. We're documenting a dangerous violator undermining property values. She hadn't clocked who was in the recliner yet. The Attorney General, calm, mid-50s, thermos on her knee, watched Delilah the way a surgeon watches an unsterilized scalpel. One inspector marched into my kitchen, yanked open my refrigerator, and filmed my carton of eggs. Unsanitary storage, he muttered, like breakfast was a public threat. The other pressed his plastic thermometer to my window frame. Elevated surface temps, he announced gravely, as if the sun on pine meant emergency code enforcement. Delilah thrust a crumpled violation notice toward the Attorney General's face. Non-compliant dock structure, unauthorized solar array, nuisance vegetation, will be issuing emergency liens. Her HOA badge glinted like a sheriff's star from a costume shop. The Attorney General didn't move. She didn't need to. The room had already tilted away from Delilah and toward something inevitable. Delilah kept broadcasting, soaking in the comments at a girl. Hold him accountable. Film everything completely oblivious to the one line she was about to cross that you don't come back from. 6 months earlier, I thought she was just a power-drunk neighbor with a megaphone. Back then, my life was quiet. The cabin my grandfather built in '63 sits on 2 acres of timber that meet the water as naturally as breath meets lungs. Off-grid by choice panels humming on the roof. A well that tastes like stone in winter. A septic that outperforms half the county's new installs. He taught me to splice cable and sharpen an axe. He also taught me this: when someone wants your land real bad, find out why. Delilah arrived like a weather front dressed in a blazer California polish. Perfect blowout. Choreography of outrage. On her first morning, I heard the hard tick of heels on my dock at 7A. By the time I reached the porch, she was taping a notice to my screen door. Fine $500. Offense unsightly dock damaging community property values. Compliance in 72 hours or daily penalties would accrue. She said accrue like a threat and smiled like it was kindness. Ma'am, I told her, this property predates your HOA by about 40 years. My dock sits on my deeded water rights. She put both hands on her hips in my driveway like she owned the horizon. Everyone on this lake answers to me. Sweetheart. Ask the Hendersons how fighting me worked out for them. The Hendersons, who had lived 2 doors down for 23 years, had put a for sale sign out, then vanished in a week. I hadn't connected it yet. I did notice Delilah circling the cabin, taking photos of Pop's hand-carved railings, my garden beds, the panels on the south roof, talking into her phone in a tone that made my pear trees sound like explosives. When she left, the air behind her smelled like chemical air freshener and something else, stage perfume, maybe. It clung to the boards after she was gone. The next letter came by certified mail, heavy with legal perfume of its own. A downtown firm alleged my dock trespassed into a community waterway and invoiced me $3,000 in retroactive violation fees, plus a threat to slap a lien if I didn't pay in 10 days. For the first time, my stomach went cold. They had letterhead. I had a tool belt and a stubborn streak. Pop's voice carried me to the courthouse basement, where the dust remembers. Betty, the clerk who still keeps score of fishing tournaments from decades ago, helped me pull the old surveys. The deed from 1963 was plain as daylight. Our lot line ran 50 feet into the lake, My dock didn't trespass. It was dead center in my water. The HOA, for the record, was born in 1998, 35 years late to this conversation. I drove home with photocopies and the feeling of having found bedrock. That feeling lasted until I tried to leave for groceries and found Delilah's Escalade parked sideways across my driveway like a gate. She cracked her window just enough for her voice to slip through. "Reviewing community parking regulations," she said. "Might take a while." Behind her sunglasses, I watched my reflection 52 years of building power grids for other people's homes, standing still on my own land because a neighborhood president liked the sound of her own siren. She idled there, perfume and exhaust pooling together, composing her next post in the theater of outrage while the lake breathed around us, unconcerned. I didn't know it yet, but 3 families had already sold at cut-rate prices in the 2 months since she arrived. Pop's warning pressed on my ribs. Find out why they want your land. I decided I would. The next morning, I woke to the metallic rattle of loons out on the water and the sound of something heavier paper sliding under my screen door. I found a thick envelope with a downtown law firm's letterhead printed in blue foil. Inside, the language was dressed up to look official, but boiled down to one ugly threat: my dock was in violation of community waterway regulations. And I owed $3,000 in retroactive fees. Pay within 10 days or face a lien. I'd built substations and power grids that carried electricity across 3 counties. I knew intimidation when I saw it. This was no neighborly complaint, it was a calculated attack. Still, seeing my family's home listed in legal jargon as a non-compliant structure made my coffee taste like ash. I drove to the county courthouse, a damp brick building that smelled of dust and old ink. Betty, the clerk who remembered my grandfather from fishing tournaments, helped me dig out the original surveys. The map was stamped, signed, and dated 1963. Our property line didn't end at the shoreline. It extended 50 feet into the lake. Pop hadn't just built a dock, he'd built on his own water. And the kicker: the HOA hadn't even existed until 1998. On paper, they had no authority here. I left the courthouse clutching those copies like a shield. For a moment, I felt the old stubborn pride of my working days proof in hand, facts on my side. That pride evaporated the instant I reached my driveway. Delilah's Escalade sat sideways across it, hazard lights blinking like a dare. I tapped on her tinted window. It slid down just an inch. Her perfume hit me first, sharp and chemical, filling the August air with an artificial sweetness. "Oh, Daniel," she drawled, "just reviewing community parking regulations. Might take a while." She had me boxed in, and she knew it. Behind her sunglasses, her smirk reflected back at me like a challenge. I could almost hear Pop's voice whispering, "Find out why they want your land." That night, I thought about the Hendersons again, 23 years on the lake, then gone overnight. 2 other elderly couples had already sold in the weeks since Delilah's arrival. 3 families in 2 months. Too much coincidence. By Friday, the pressure escalated. Another citation appeared on my porch railing. Vegetation control violation. $250 daily fine. My vegetable garden, 3 neat rows of tomatoes and beans, was apparently a menace to community aesthetics. Hours later, a notice about unauthorized energy apparatus was taped to my solar panel array. Delilah was circling like a hawk, snapping photos, narrating to her live stream audience about dangerous structures and reckless property owners. Her followers echoed every word online, drowning out truth with hashtags. Neighbors who had once waved now crossed the street. On the HOA's Facebook page, Delilah posted a photo of my cabin taken at twilight. The caption read, "Eyesores threaten all of us. Some residents just don't care about community values. Protect our lake." The comments section lit up. People I'd fished alongside were suddenly parroting her language, treating me like a public nuisance. Late that weekend, I stepped onto the porch and found my mailbox drenched in neon orange spray paint. The word "comply" blazed across the metal, dripping down like a wound. My hidden security camera, tucked behind a pine tree, caught everything the Escalade's headlights. Delilah stepping out at 2:30, spray can in hand, her badge gleaming in the moonlight. I called the sheriff's office. An hour later, Deputy Chad Cromwell, her nephew, arrived. He glanced at the footage, then shrugged. "Probably just kids," he said, writing nothing down. His smirk was the same as hers, inherited like a family heirloom. As I scrubbed paint off the mailbox, my hands raw from the chemical bite, I realized this wasn't about weeds or solar panels. Delilah was building a paper trail, stacking citations, creating a narrative that made me look like the problem neighbor. She wasn't just after fines. She was laying the groundwork to take my land piece by piece, but she'd underestimated me. Pop always said electricity only flows when there's a closed circuit. Delilah thought she had me cornered, but she was about to complete the wrong circuit, one that would shock her empire to the ground. I wasn't just going to fight her citations. I was going to uncover what made 3 families walk away from paradise and why this woman needed me gone so badly. The next morning, another knock came at my door, not from Delilah, but from a man with a clipboard and a county seal on his shirt. "Building inspection," he said, eyes apologetic. "We've had a complaint. The war had entered its next phase." The man at my door wore county khaki and the expression of someone drafted into a fight he didn't choose. "Name's Dale Morrison," he said, lifting the clipboard like a peace flag. "Building inspection. Complaint came through this morning. I'm sorry, Daniel. You know how it is if it's filed. I'm obligated to look. I knew Dale from job sites years back. He used to crawl attics while I traced dead circuits. He stepped over my threshold like a guest at a funeral, eyes darting to the splintered door jamb Delilah had kicked days earlier. "Let's get you what you need," I said, and opened every room as if I'd staged the place for sale. He checked joists, measured railing heights, tested GFCIs in the kitchen, ran a simple load test on the breaker panel, then climbed the attic ladder and stared at Pop's old beams the way men admire a straight furrow. On the way down, he hesitated at the south window and watched sunlight burn a clean line across the lake. "Everything I see is to code or better," he said at last, scribbling something that looked like relief. "Frankly, it outperforms most new builds." "Then why the complaint?" He glanced at the driveway, as if the Escalade might reappear. "Anonymous," he murmured, "but not really." 2 hours after Dale left, a white SUV eased to a stop beside the porch. A woman in a navy windbreaker tucked a strand of gray hair behind one ear and introduced herself as Janet Bennett, County Environmental Health. "We had a report of septic failure and possible effluent discharge," she said, tone clinical but kind. "Mind if I run a dye test?" I watched green tracer pour into a toilet tank and waited with her at the outflow cleanout while chickadees argued in the pines. 10 minutes later, she capped her kit. "System's tight, and your bacteria levels are excellent. Whoever filed that report either doesn't understand septic or doesn't care." By late afternoon, the fire marshal rolled in Bob Rodriguez, boots dusty from an actual brush inspection somewhere that mattered. "Tip about a hazardous solar array," he said, following me around the array while I rattled off specs. He grunted at the rapid shutdown label, the disconnect switch. "The conduit runs tight to code." "Looks like training material," he said. "Mind if I bring apprentices here sometime?" The visits read like a serial novel, each chapter a new official, a new accusation, each ending the same: compliant, safe, better than required. But with every clipboard and badge, a different kind of record formed a chain of official entries that made it look, on paper, like my cabin was trouble. That night, Delilah's Facebook page blossomed with concern, her profile photo blazer, pearls, the HOA pin gleaming hovered above paragraphs of practiced outrage. "All hands on deck today at Clearwater," she wrote, multiple agencies responding to resident safety concerns. "We will not let neglect threaten our families." She posted a shadowed photo of my roofline at dusk, the panels black against purple sky. as if darkness itself proved her case. The hashtags multiplied like fungus. Neighbors I'd taught to splice extension cords chimed in with frowns and questions that weren't questions. Is it even legal to put that many panels on one roof? Heard there's a leak. Thought I smelled something by the water line. A few brave souls pushed back that man built half our grid. Leave him alone, but they were outnumbered by unfamiliar accounts wearing stock photo smiles. The rhythm felt professional. Amplify. Alarm. Repeat. On Sunday, I found a paper taped to my tomato stakes. Vegetation violation, noxious growth. 250 day. 3 neat rows of beans nodded in a breeze that smelled like basil and lake mud. I stood there with the notice in my hand and felt a steadying anger, the kind that runs under the skin like an electric ground. You can bleed a man with paper as surely as with a blade. You just have to file enough sheets. I started a log. Dates, times, names, badge numbers, photos of every notice, every vehicle that slowed at my drive. I photographed my mailbox from multiple angles, the ghost of orange paint still visible in seams I couldn't scrub clean. I added a spreadsheet to track finds Delilah was inventing by the day. Pop's old oak table became a command post, surveys laid flat, copies of statutes, a printout of the HOA bylaws with my grandfather's purchase date circled in red. By midweek, Delilah upped the performance. Channel 7's Community Spotlight ran a segment shot from my shoreline. A soft, worried anchor nodded while Delilah pointed down my dock with her HOA badge glinting like authority. They aired close-ups of my breaker panel without context and B-roll of a child in a life vest tossing a rock into the shallows. The narration that accompanied it was surgical. Concern is growing about non-compliant structures and potential dangers near public water. Public, they said, over a photo of deeded water. My phone vibrated with messages. Some angry, some confused. A few simply asked, "You okay?" The worst were from people who seemed to want to help, but were afraid to say so where others could see. At dusk, headlights slid into my drive and then killed. A pickup door slammed, boots on gravel. Jake Martinez, old union brother, forearms roped from decades of pulling cable, stepped into the porch light with a six-pack and a look that said he'd already decided whose side he was on. "Brought 20 guys past your place today," he said, dropping to the porch step like he'd been there every evening of his life. "Told them to study your array and tell me if they see one thing wrong." They couldn't. They're not shy, either. We sat, drinking the kind of quiet beer you only earn after a day that tried to bend you. The lake breathed in the dark. Somewhere a loon laughed like it understood human folly. "You're not dealing with a homeowner," Jake said finally. "You're dealing with an operator. This is a playbook." The porch light buzzed and my phone lit up again, an unknown number from downtown. I almost let it go to voicemail, then answered. "Daniel Ross?" a voice asked. "My name's Charles Davis. We went to Clearwater High the same year. I'm an attorney now. I've been tracking what's happening at the lake. You should know the state is quietly compiling complaints about abusive HOA practices. They're looking for cases with documentation." The word documentation hung in the air, sticky as summer. I looked at the table inside maps. Logs, dates lined up like fence posts, and felt the circuit closing. "What kind of cases?" I asked. "The kind that make attorneys general pay attention," he said. "If you've got records, this might be bigger than your doc." Charles Davis didn't waste time. Before we hung up, he'd scheduled coffee at the diner off Route 7 and sent a checklist like he was wiring a panel every notice, every inspection report, photos with timestamps, screenshots of social posts, names of anyone present. Patterns persuade prosecutors. He said, dates and dollars make patterns. When the call ended, I looked at Pop's oak table, the surveys, the logbook, the stack of fresh printouts, and felt something click into place. I wasn't just defending a doc. I was building a record. The next 48 hours turned into triage. I labeled folders, numbered files, and added a column for witnesses next to each incident. I walked the shoreline with my phone camera, photographing where my deeded line met the lake. At noon, I knocked on Mr. Peterson's door. He'd tended window boxes on his cottage for as long as I'd known him. Now the boxes sat in a trash bin by the steps. She called them non-compliant decor, he said, embarrassed, as if marigolds could commit a crime. Said the brackets were a safety hazard. I've had those brackets since '89. Did you get a fine too? Then an invitation to discuss a graceful transition if upkeep felt too hard at my age? He stared past me toward the water. I told her my hands still work. Downshore. Maya and Chris, the young couple with a toddler who liked to wave at boats, opened their door only as far as the chain would allow. We can't get involved, Maya whispered. She said the playset violates height rules. If we push back, they'll escalate. I'm sorry. A minute later, she passed me a folded paper through the gap. Citation unsightly equipment visible from shoreline $100 daily. Private messages began trickling into my phone. A man I'd taught to splice an extension cord wrote, "Don't text me back," but we were told to file a complaint or face our own review. A woman I'd helped when her breaker kept tripping sent a single line. "They told us you're dangerous around kids. Be careful." That night, I reread my stack of violation notices and caught a detail I'd missed. In tiny type along the footer fines, payable to Clearwater Community Improvement Fund, Act 291. The phrase looked official, but I'd been on enough projects to know what genuine accounting lines look like. I circled it in red and added a note for Betty at the courthouse. At dawn, I drove to the diner. Charles arrived with legal pads and the focused eyes of someone who'd chased down hard truths before. He paged through my folders, tapping each label with his pen. "This is disciplined," he said. "Here's the bigger picture. There are complaints in 3 other counties with the same anatomy rapid citations. Anonymous tips that generate inspections, social smears, and cash offers floating in the background. If that fund line is what I think it is, we'll request HOA annual filings and bank records. Most associations file something. Corrupt ones file the wrong things or nothing at all." I asked the question that had been buzzing like a trapped horsefly. Why the rush to clear the shore? 2 reasons, he said. 1, drive down values, scoop up properties, flip to a developer. 2, siphon assessments through friendly vendors. Either way, you're in the way. On our way out, he paused, as if choosing how much to say. "People tell me Delilah's husband does political finance up in the Capitol. I don't know yet what that means, but it makes folks hesitate." The HOA announced a special community meeting for that evening in the boathouse. The notice framed it as a conversation about safety and standards. I went early and sat in the second row. Residents filed in faces I'd known for decades, faces I now only saw behind curtains. Delilah stood at the front with a laptop and a stack of glossy handouts. 2 board members flanked her, stiff as fence posts. "Thank you for coming," she began, voice warm enough to melt plastic. "We're all here because we love our lake." She clicked to a slide a photo of my roofline at an angle that made the panels look jagged. The sun glaring like a siren. "We cannot tolerate hazards," she said. "We've responded to multiple concerns about non-compliant structures and aggressive behavior." Hands went up, not mine others. Mrs. Klein, who never raised her voice even when her dock snapped in a storm, asked, "What hazards Dale said he passed inspection?" Delilah's smile tightened. "We respect inspectors, but community standards are broader than code." A man at the back new owner, polo shirt, watch that flashed, said, "What about the emergency dock repair assessments from last year? We paid, but the contractor never came." "Supply chain constraints," Delilah answered smoothly. "Funds are in the improvement account," which account another voice asked. "How much is in it?" She straightened, her badge catching the light. "Treasurer reports are available upon request." The treasurer, a slight woman who hadn't looked up all evening, fumbled with a folder. Pages slipped, fluttering like startled birds. For a beat too long, no one spoke. Then Delilah launched into a new slide about aesthetic vegetation guidelines, and the questions died beneath a carpet of policy. When the meeting ended, small knots of neighbors formed and unformed like schooling fish. Some avoided me, some squeezed my shoulder. One man I barely knew leaned in and muttered, "Watch your back," before peeling away. Outside, the boathouse light spilled onto gravel. A breeze came off the water carrying the wet slate smell that always made me think of pop sanding oars. I'd almost reached my truck when I noticed the envelope under the wiper bright orange, the kind used for hazardous tags. Inside, a single sheet. Final notice. Immediate compliance required. Then, a line in handwriting I recognized from 1,000 Facebook posts. "You're scaring families. Last chance to cooperate." My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A male voice I knew too well said, "Next time we come out for a complaint, we might not leave with a clean bill. Mr. Ross." Wouldn't want something to go wrong out there in the dark? The line went dead, but the words sat in my ear like a live wire. Wouldn't want something to go wrong out there in the dark. I stood on the porch gripping the phone until my knuckles blanched, staring into the tree line where crickets droned like static. Somewhere in the shadows, headlights blinked once, then faded. Whoever had made the call had been close enough to watch me answer. The next morning I drove back to the courthouse with the envelope from my windshield and the threat still humming under my skin. Betty helped me comb through the HOA filings. She shook her head, lips pursed. Annual reports are supposed to show income and expenses. But look here. She pointed to the last page of their public file. The columns were nearly blank line items that said community projects, beautification, miscellaneous, each with round numbers that didn't match a single invoice. Sloppy, she whispered, or deliberate. I photocopied everything. The thin pages felt hotter than they should have, like evidence straight from a furnace. Back at the cabin, I found a bright yellow citation nailed to my porch beam. Unauthorized structural modifications. It read in bold letters. Beneath it, a daily penalty of $400. My modification. A screened porch Pop and I had built in the 70s, grandfathered in before the HOA was a gleam in anyone's eye. That evening, Jake swung by again. His truck headlights swept the yard, illuminating another notice taped to my dock post. He peeled it free and read aloud, his voice thick with contempt. Failure to maintain community standards, possible lien enforcement. He crumpled it and tossed it on the porch floor. "She's baiting you into a blow-up. Dan, don't give it to her. Just keep stacking the proof." But the pressure was leaking into every corner of my life. Old friends at the VFW hall started keeping distance. One even said he'd been told supporting me could jeopardize veteran funding partnerships. My gut said Delilah's reach extended into every handshake and whispered conversation within a 50-mile radius. Then came the spray paint again. This time not on the mailbox, but across the gravel at the foot of my driveway. Huge block letters, "Move or else." The orange glow of it under moonlight looked like fire smoldering on the ground. I installed 2 more cameras that night, hidden high in the pines, infrared lenses staring back at the road. 2 days later, Channel 7 returned, this time with a more polished package. Delilah stood on my dock, gesturing at my cabin behind her as if it were condemned property. She wore the same blazer, the HOA badge gleaming under sunset light. The voiceover claimed multiple ongoing investigations into my noncompliance. My phone erupted with messages. Neighbors who'd known me for decades suddenly demanded to know why I was bringing shame on the lake. I watched the segment twice, jaw tight. The anchor never once mentioned that every inspection had cleared me. The edit was deliberate, calculated, surgical. That night, a knock rattled my door at 10 p.m. I opened it to find no one, just a shoebox sitting on the mat. Inside lay copies of my violation notices, neatly stacked, with one fresh sheet on top. This is only the beginning. No signature. But the perfume clinging to the paper was the same heavy sweetness that always hung in Delilah's wake. I sat down at Pop's oak table, spread everything out, and started a timeline wall with string and push pins, citations, inspections, spray paint, threats, the meeting, the news segments. The pattern formed itself, an escalation, precise as an electrical circuit ramping toward overload. At midnight, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a photo message. My cabin, framed from the trees, porch light glowing, taken from no more than 20 yards away. The caption read, "Clock's ticking." The hair rose on the back of my neck. They weren't just trying to bankrupt me. They wanted me scared in my own home. And for the first time, I felt the real possibility that if I didn't find their weakness fast, they might just succeed. I barely slept after that photo message. Every creak of the cabin sounded like footsteps on the porch, every branch scraping the roof like someone testing the shingles. By dawn, I'd brewed 3 pots of coffee I didn't drink, just for the comfort of the smell. Pop's words echoed like a metronome. Find out why they want your land. I started digging into Delilah's past the way I used to trace faulty circuits, slow, methodical, following each wire until it revealed where the current leaked. Her name popped up in a California subdivision 3 years back, tied to another HOA beautification initiative that ended with half a dozen properties sold under duress. Public records showed complaints filed, then mysteriously withdrawn. The HOA there dissolved a year later, leaving a trail of liens and angry former owners. Robert Cromwell, her husband, was listed in state financial disclosures as treasurer for the party apparatus, with access to zoning and development data. On paper, his salary was modest, but their family trust had ballooned by hundreds of thousands within the same time frame. I scribbled notes and circled figures until the page looked like a spider web. That afternoon, I drove into town for groceries. When I came back, my driveway was blocked again, this time not by Delilah herself, but by 2 men I didn't recognize standing in front of a pickup. They wore the same windbreakers as her so-called inspectors, arms folded, sunglasses reflecting the sun. "You Daniel Ross?" one asked, though he already knew. "Who's asking Lakeside Beautification Committee? We're here to document ongoing violations." One of them lifted a camera and snapped shots of my truck, my porch, even the apple tree Pop planted in '72. I told them to get off my property. The taller one leaned in close enough that I could smell cigarette smoke buried under cologne. Funny thing about property, Ross, it only matters if people believe you own it. Right now, people don't. They climbed into the truck and left me with the dust. That evening, I attended another community update at the clubhouse. Delilah ran it like a courtroom she owned. She paraded the supposed complaints photos of my porch light at odd angles. Close-ups of peeling paint on my shed door magnified 10 times on a projector. Each image was accompanied by language about dangerous neglect and patterns of hostility. Neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Some stared at the floor, unwilling to meet my eyes. A few nodded along as if hypnotized. When I raised my hand to respond, Delilah cut me off with a smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Mr. Ross, your aggressive interruptions are noted. For the sake of order, we'll proceed without further disruption." The humiliation burned hotter than any fine. I left before she finished her slideshow, my chest tight with rage. As I walked across the gravel lot, someone called my name softly. It was Tom Martinez, Jake's cousin. He pressed a folded sheet into my hand. "She told us if we don't back her, we'll be cited next. Be careful. Daniel." Then he hurried away. In my truck, I opened the sheet. It wasn't a citation. It was a photocopy of a check. Pay to the order of Clearwater Community Improvement Fund. Amount $8,000. Memo line emergency dock repair assessment. The date matched a storm that had barely rattled a single shutter. I stared at the numbers until my vision blurred. This wasn't just harassment. It was theft, organized and systematic. I drove home with headlights off, heart pounding. When I pulled into the drive, something new glowed in the dark. A wooden stake jammed into the earth at the edge of my property. A red placard nailed to it, foreclosure pending. No seal, no county insignia, just bold letters printed on heavy stock. But from the road, it looked official, and that was enough to poison the air around me. I yanked it out of the ground and held it under the porch light. On the back, scrawled in familiar looping handwriting, was one more line, "Sell now, or we'll make sure you wish you had." The fake foreclosure sign sat on my oak table like a live grenade. Every time I passed it, the bold letters seemed louder, as if they were daring me to panic. Delilah's campaign had evolved from petty fines into psychological warfare. And if I knew anything from 30 years of tracing circuits, it was that escalation meant desperation. Somewhere behind her barrage of notices, news spots, and midnight threats, there was a current I hadn't yet followed. I drove back to the courthouse the next morning with the placard under my arm. Betty didn't even flinch when she saw it. She led me straight to the records room, the hum of old fluorescents buzzing like hornets. HOA filings are public, she reminded me, sliding a stack of folders across the counter. Let's see how clean their books really are. The numbers were a disaster. Assessments listed for dock repairs that never happened, $281 collected over 2 years, not a single invoice attached. Landscaping contracts billed at $151 to a company incorporated 3 weeks after Delilah became president. Cromwell Grounds and Maintenance, the paperwork read, with an address that traced back to her brother-in-law. But the storm reimbursements were the part that made my blood boil. 3 separate insurance claims, totaling $95,000 for damage that never existed. Betty even pulled National Weather Service reports to confirm sunny days listed as catastrophic storm impact. It was fraud painted in numbers, and the brushstrokes were bold enough to hang in a gallery. I drove home, gripping the photocopies so tightly the paper crinkled like foil. The truth was right there. And now it wasn't just my dock at stake. It was the wallets of every neighbor who'd paid into her improvement fund. The Hendersons, the Petersons, even Tom and Susan, forced to write checks they couldn't afford under threat of liens. That night, I spread the documents across Pop's table and began pinning them to the wall. Strings of red yarn stretched between citations, inspections, news broadcasts, and now bank records. My cabin looked less like a retirement retreat and more like a detective's office from a crime drama. Jake came by and whistled low when he saw the setup. "Looks like you're hunting a serial killer," he said, picking up one of the false invoices. "In a way, I am," I answered. "She's been bleeding this community dry for years, and now I've got the trail." We stayed up past midnight cross-referencing dates. That's when I noticed it. Each bogus assessment coincided with a family leaving the lake. The Hendersons' sale matched the first dock repair. The Garcias' departure aligned with the landscaping payout. Mrs. Patterson moving in with her daughter same month as a storm claim. It was a pattern: harass, fine, intimidate, force a sale, pocket the payout, then repeat. I felt a chill even with the wood stove burning. Pop had always said corruption is bigger than you think when you first glimpse it. He was right. Delilah wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant. She was the tip of a racket that stretched into banks, insurance adjusters, maybe even the State House. The next morning, I received a knock on the door that rattled the frame. Deputy Chad Cromwell stood on the porch, arms folded, cruiser idling behind him. "We've had more complaints," he said flatly. "Reports of suspicious visitors, loud noises. Thought I'd remind you that repeated disturbances can justify removal under nuisance statutes." I stared at him, holding the foreclosure placard in one hand and the fraudulent invoices in the other. "Funny thing," I said, voice low. "Those statutes don't apply to evidence of grand larceny, which is what I'm holding." His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. He tipped his hat and left without another word. That night, I heard movement outside the cabin. Not coyotes, not raccoons. Human footsteps crunching gravel, slow and deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the yard. The light caught a figure in a blazer crouched by my solar array, screwdriver in hand. The face that turned toward me was unmistakable. Delilah herself, eyes wide in the glare, frozen mid-sabotage. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the beam of my flashlight pinning Delilah like a thief caught in the act. Her blazer glittered with sequins that looked absurd under the harsh white light. In one hand, she clutched a screwdriver, in the other, a pair of wire cutters. The smell of cigarette smoke clung to her like a confession. "What exactly are you doing on my property at 2 a.m?" I asked. My voice steady only because anger held it upright. She straightened slowly, lips curling into that smug half-smile she'd worn since the day she taped the first citation to my porch. "Community inspection," she said. "Your solar system poses a danger to everyone on this lake." I tilted the flashlight toward the small red light on my hidden camera mounted above the panel. Funny. This inspection just made it onto my security feed, along with you trespassing. For the first time, her confidence cracked. Her eyes flicked toward the trees where the camera glowed, then back at me. She dropped the cutters into her purse like a guilty child hiding candy and marched toward her Escalade without another word. The tires spun gravel as she roared away, leaving the night heavy with exhaust. By sunrise, I had downloaded the footage to 3 thumb drives and mailed copies, one to Charles, one to Jake, and one tucked in a lockbox at the VFW hall. If Delilah wanted to play sabotage, she was going to star in her own crime reel. But the attacks didn't stop. That afternoon, I found my boat drifting halfway across the lake, hull scraping against rocks. The heavy chains I'd used to secure it had been cut clean through. Metal shavings glittered on the dock like breadcrumbs. Pop's old bass boat, his pride and joy, bore deep gouges along the side. It felt like vandalism against his memory more than against me. 2 days later, the septic system began to back up. A stench so sharp it burned the throat rose from the ground near the tank. The emergency repair crew worked for hours, then showed me the evidence industrial drain cleaner had been poured directly into the system, killing the bacteria and corroding the pipes. "This wasn't an accident," the technician said. "Somebody did this on purpose, and they knew exactly what they were doing." The bill came to $3,200, but the forensic sample was worth more than gold it proved intent. Meanwhile, Delilah's media campaign reached fever pitch. Anonymous accounts multiplied on Facebook, each posting identical paragraphs about my dangerous property. Channel 7 ran another feature, this time with Delilah framed as a tireless community advocate battling an aggressive homeowner who refuses to comply. I watched in disbelief as my cabin, Pop's legacy, became B-roll for her propaganda. And yet, cracks began to show. Neighbors whispered apologies in private. One left a casserole on my porch with a note, "We know you're not the problem. Stay strong." Another slipped an envelope under my door containing their own citation proof Delilah was targeting them, too. Charles called one evening, his voice electric. "Daniel, the Attorney General's office is looking closely at these HOA cases. They've seen the pattern in multiple counties. But what you're collecting, the sabotage footage, the fraudulent assessments, this could be the keystone. They want a meeting." My heart pounded as he gave me the date. The state's top prosecutor, willing to hear me out. It felt like a floodgate opening, but Delilah must have sensed the tide turning, because her tactics grew more brazen. One night I returned from town to find Deputy Chad parked in my driveway, cruiser lights flashing. He leaned against the hood, arms folded, smirk plastered across his face. "Another disturbance report," he said. "Neighbors claim they heard shouting and saw suspicious visitors." "There were no visitors," I replied. "Doesn't matter. The reports are on record now." He tapped the stack of forms on his clipboard. "Paper trails add up. Ross, one day, they bury you." He climbed back into the cruiser and left me standing in the red-blue glow. I realized then that Delilah wasn't just trying to bankrupt me or smear my name. She was showing the rest of the community what happened when you resisted her. I was the example, her cautionary tale. Inside, the smell of septic chemicals still clung to the air despite the repairs. I sat at Pop's table surrounded by photocopies, logs, and evidence. My hands shook as I added Chad's report to the growing pile. The question wasn't if Delilah would slip, but when and whether I'd still be standing by the time she did. At midnight, my phone buzzed. Another message. This time it wasn't words or threats. It was a single photo me, sitting at my own table, taken through the window from outside. I froze when I saw that photo. The reflection of the lamp on Pop's oak table gleamed in the glass. My hunched figure framed like prey in a hunter's sights. Someone had been standing just feet from my window, watching while I sorted through the evidence. I stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, but the night only gave back silence, just the wind moving through pines and the lap of water against the dock. Whoever had taken the picture was gone. The message beneath the photo was short: "You're being watched. Stop, or you'll regret it." I forwarded the image to Charles immediately. He called within minutes. "Daniel, this is no longer harassment. This is intimidation tied to organized crime. Don't delete a single thing. We need to present this to the Attorney General's team." The next day, Jake helped me mount additional cameras, tucking them in birdhouses and under the eaves. He worked with the same quiet efficiency we used to share on job sites, but his eyes kept flicking to the tree line. "They're testing you, Dan," he said, tightening a bracket. "They want you rattled, second-guessing. But cameras don't lie. Let them hang themselves." Meanwhile, Betty at the courthouse pulled another set of records. This time she flagged the Clearwater Community Improvement Fund itself. "They're supposed to file tax returns once revenue passes a certain threshold," she explained, tapping a line on the report. "But there are no filings for the last 2 years despite collecting well over that amount. That's tax evasion on top of fraud." Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. Delilah wasn't a lone zealot with a taste for power. She was running a machine: fake inspections, trumped-up fines, sham contracts, and siphoned funds, all protected by her husband's political connections and Chad's badge. But if the threats were meant to scare me silent, they backfired. Each new violation, each phony report, made my case stronger. I assembled binders labeled by category: citations, inspections, media smears, financial irregularities, sabotage. I even printed screenshots of her Facebook posts, highlighting the stock photo accounts parroting her words like wind-up toys. One evening, as I reviewed everything, headlights swept across my yard. I stepped to the porch, heart hammering, only to see Mrs. Patterson's old Buick roll to a stop. She'd moved to Florida months earlier after Delilah's campaign pushed her out. Now she stepped shakily onto the gravel, eyes damp. "I had to come back," she whispered. "That woman cost me my home. But you might finally stop her." She pressed a folder into my hands. Inside were her old payment stubs, thousands in emergency assessments that matched the fraudulent line items I'd uncovered. Her testimony would be another nail in Delilah's coffin. Word spread quietly. Other families began slipping me documents, canceled checks, violation letters, anonymous threats. At the VFW hall, we gathered around scarred wooden tables while retired soldiers and widows recounted the same playbook: fines, inspections, pressure to sell, then mysterious buyers swooping in. The weight of their stories filled the room like smoke. One man, Frank Weber, a retired accountant, volunteered to comb through the numbers. A week later, he returned, pale but determined. "This isn't just HOA abuse," he said. "It's systemic fraud. Shell companies, insurance scams, tax evasion. The IRS would eat this alive. The evidence mountain was no longer mine alone. It belonged to all of us." Still, Delilah refused to let go. Her Facebook posts grew more venomous. Her late-night drives past my cabin more frequent. One evening, as I was locking up, I caught sight of her Escalade idling at the end of my drive, headlights off, silhouette motionless behind the wheel. I raised my phone to take a photo. The SUV roared off, gravel spitting like sparks. Later that night, another message buzzed on my phone. No text this time, just a 15-second video clip. It showed my cabin porch, filmed from the bushes, with a distorted voice whispering over it. Tick, tick, tick. That was the moment I knew the fuse was burning fast. And when the Attorney General's office finally called to confirm the meeting at my cabin, I realized we weren't just setting a trap for Delilah. We were about to expose the entire empire she'd built, live and undeniable. The morning of the meeting dawned gray, the kind of sky that pressed low and heavy on the lake. Mist clung to the water, muffling every sound. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I brewed coffee but barely touched it, my hands too restless. Every folder, every binder, every photo was laid out on Pop's oak table in neat rows, evidence sharpened to a blade's edge. At 9 sharp, the state's Attorney General arrived. Patricia Williamson stepped from her sedan with the quiet authority of someone used to courtrooms and cameras. Mid-50s, sharp-eyed, not a wasted movement. She carried a thermos in one hand and a briefcase in the other. Behind her came 2 assistants and an investigator with a recorder already in hand. "Mr. Ross," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "We've reviewed Charles Davis's submissions. What you've documented here could tie together fraud across multiple counties. But we need her to reveal herself in real time. Are you ready?" I glanced around the cabin. Hidden microphones nestled in rafters, cameras disguised in bookshelves, FBI agents stationed out of sight in my shed and along the tree line. Every angle covered, every wire live. "I've been ready for months," I told her. We had just begun reviewing the forged assessments when the sound arrived. The guttural growl of an Escalade tearing up the gravel road too fast, tires spitting rocks like gunfire. We didn't have to wonder who it was. Delilah's voice carried even before the door opened. "This is it. Folks watch live as we expose government corruption." She was broadcasting, her phone raised high, her 2 inspectors trailing behind with cameras of their own. The front door rattled once, then exploded inward. Wood splintered across the floor as Delilah stormed in, heels clacking on shattered boards, badge pinned proudly like she was storming Congress. "I demand to know why the Attorney General of this state is conspiring against homeowners with this man," she shouted, spinning in a slow circle so her followers could soak in every angle. Patricia Williamson rose calmly from Pop's recliner, flashing her credentials in the live stream's full view. "Mrs. Cromwell," she said, her voice level but edged like a blade. "I am the Attorney General of Missouri. You have just committed multiple felonies, breaking and entering, criminal harassment, and intimidation in front of law enforcement, on camera, and to an audience of your own choosing." For the first time, Delilah faltered. The swagger drained from her face as the reality caught up with her. Her livestream comments scrolled wildly. Thousands of viewers realizing the brave HOA president was broadcasting her own arrest. The back door creaked open and FBI agent Torres stepped in with 2 officers, weapons holstered but presence undeniable. "Delilah Cromwell, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and criminal conspiracy," Torres announced. Delilah's phone trembled in her hand as the agents closed in. She tried one last gambit, thrusting her badge toward the Attorney General. "You don't understand. I have jurisdiction here." Patricia Williamson didn't flinch. "You have nothing but a record of theft and intimidation. And now you have a nationwide audience watching you face the truth." The click of handcuffs echoed through my cabin, sharp as the closing of a trap. Delilah's face, once composed and smug, twisted into shock and fury as her live stream continued rolling, every second of her downfall captured and shared. Neighbors gathered outside, drawn by the commotion. They watched in stunned silence as Delilah was led out past the very dock she'd tried to demolish, her vanity plates glaring under the morning sun. The woman who had ruled the lake with threats and citations was now stumbling in heels toward a waiting federal vehicle. And then, as she passed me on the porch. She spat the words low enough for only me to hear. "This isn't over. My husband will bury you." Delilah's words clung to me like smoke. "My husband will bury you." But the crowd outside didn't hear the threat. What they saw was the woman who had tormented us for months being walked past my dock in handcuffs. Neighbors who'd been too afraid to speak now lined the gravel road. Mrs. Patterson wept openly, whispering, "It's over. It's finally over." Tom Martinez clutched his wife's hand, both of them shaking their heads as if they couldn't believe their own eyes. Even Mr. Peterson, frail but resolute, leaned on his cane and muttered, "About damn time." The Escalade, with its Rule 1 plates, was hoisted onto a tow truck. The crowd gasped as if watching a fallen monument carried away. For months, that SUV had been Delilah's chariot of intimidation, parked sideways in driveways, blocking roads, idling outside homes at night. Now it was evidence. Still, the air was heavy. The community's relief was laced with unease, like everyone was waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it did. An unmarked sedan pulled up fast, brakes squealing. Out stepped Robert Cromwell, Delilah's husband, in a pressed suit and red tie. He strode toward the porch with the fury of a man who thought his name alone could scatter the law. "This is unlawful," he shouted, jabbing a finger at Agent Torres. "Do you know who I am? I'll have every one of you out of a job before sundown. My wife has been framed." Patricia Williamson faced him with unflinching calm. "Mr. Cromwell, we are fully aware of who you are, and we are also aware of your role in funneling zoning information to developers tied to these fraudulent HOA funds. I suggest you retain counsel." Robert's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. He looked around desperately for support, but the neighbors who once nodded politely at him now stared coldly. His connections, his money, his swagger, none of it mattered here. Delilah shrieked from the back of the federal vehicle. "Robert, don't let them do this. Tell them it's political persecution." Her voice cracked, less commanding than I'd ever heard it. Robert opened his mouth, but Agent Torres cut him off. "Sir, step aside. You are interfering with an ongoing investigation. Internal Affairs will be speaking with you very soon." For once, Robert had no script. He retreated, stumbling slightly, muttering threats about lawsuits that sounded emptier with every syllable. The neighbors erupted then not in cheers, but in a murmur of pent-up truth. Accusations spilled like water from a burst dam. She fined me for flowers. They forced my parents out. We paid thousands for repairs that never happened. It was chaos, but the right kind people reclaiming their voices. As Delilah was driven away, I finally exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The tyrant of Clearwater Lake was gone, exposed in front of her own audience. But her parting words rattled in my chest. "My husband will bury you." That night, long after the crowd dispersed and the agents packed up evidence, I sat alone on the porch. The lake was calm, moonlight glinting off its surface like shards of glass. I should have felt victorious. Instead, unease gnawed at me. Because Delilah was right about one thing: she wasn't the only Cromwell, and Robert still had the connections, the money, and the arrogance of a man who believed the rules were written for other people. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, and the line crackled with static before a voice spoke. "You've made powerful enemies, Mr. Ross." Delilah was only the beginning. The voice on the line was calm, too calm, male, measured, like someone used to delivering bad news without flinching. "You think taking down Delilah changes anything? You've kicked a hornet's nest. People bigger than her are watching now. Walk away before you regret it." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, the night air around me suddenly colder. It wasn't Delilah this time. It was something above her. The following morning, Charles arrived with fresh papers in hand. His usual briskness was tempered by something heavier. "Daniel, The AG's office is filing charges not just against Delilah, but against Robert too. Financial conspiracy, misuse of party funds, the whole 9 yards. But here's the rub: he's already hired one of the most expensive defense teams in the state. They're going to drag this out, smear you harder than she ever did. I nodded slowly. She promised he'd bury me. Charles tapped the folder. Not if we keep digging first. We've got her live stream, her sabotage caught on camera, the fraudulent filings, the fake assessments. This isn't just an HOA scandal anymore. It's organized fraud. By noon, the story had exploded online. Clips of Delilah storming my cabin, her badge flashing before the Attorney General, were everywhere. Hashtags trended, ho hell. Rule 1 down. Some commenters mocked her, others speculated about how deep the corruption went. But then came the darker threads, posts calling me a liar, accusing me of being part of a government plot, even threats that named my cabin outright. The FBI installed extra surveillance equipment around the property, cameras hidden in tree trunks and mics buried near the drive. Agent Torres herself assured me, they'll try to spin this, maybe even retaliate. But every desperate move adds to our case. She was right. That evening, while reviewing footage, one of the agents caught something chilling Robert meeting with two of the inspectors at a diner 15 miles away. They slid a folder across the table, thick with papers. The surveillance team enhanced the audio snatches of conversation, broke through new strategy, discredit Ross, buy out properties faster. When the agents played me the recording, my stomach twisted. Robert wasn't planning to retreat. He was preparing to finish what Delilah started, but with more polish, more money, more reach. That night, the community gathered outside my cabin, not a formal meeting, but a spontaneous vigil of sorts. Neighbors stood in clusters, lanterns glowing, voices low but resolute. Mrs. Patterson gripped my hand. You've shown us we're not crazy. We all felt it, but you proved it. I looked at the faces, tired, angry, hopeful. They'd been bullied into silence for months, some for years. Now the silence had cracked, but just as the crowd began to thin, a car roared down the road and skidded to a stop. Headlights blazed into our eyes. A brick flew from the driver's window, smashing against the side of my porch. When I picked it up, my blood ran cold. Scrawled across the rough surface in black marker were 3 words: Last warning, Ross. The brick sat on my oak table beside the foreclosure placard and the stack of citations. Each artifact a chapter in the war Delilah and Robert had waged. But this one felt different. Threats shouted in meetings could be denied. Spray paint could be laughed off as vandalism. A brick through the air at midnight was a promise, and promises like that only ended 2 ways. By morning, federal agents had bagged it for evidence, dusting it for prints. Agent Torres looked grim. They're desperate. Desperation makes people sloppy. That's good for us, but dangerous for you. I watched her team catalog more of my binders, more photos, more recordings. What had once been my grandfather's retreat now looked like the staging ground of a criminal case, and in a way, it was. News crews descended on Clearwater Lake within days. Satellite vans lined the narrow road, their dishes aimed skyward like mechanical sunflowers. Reporters prowled the shoreline, shoving microphones at anyone who'd talk. And for the first time, the community talked back. Mr. Peterson spoke of being fined for his flower boxes. The Garcias told of thousands lost to emergency assessments. Mrs. Patterson, her voice trembling but fierce, described how intimidation drove her from her home. Their words, once murmured behind closed doors, now echoed on evening broadcasts. Delilah's arrest had opened the floodgates, and the current swept Robert into view. Investigators traced HOA funds through shell companies linked to his campaign associates. Insurance claims tied to non-existent storms bore his signature. A tangled web of fraud stretched from my dock to the State House, and every thread pointed to the Cromwell name. Meanwhile, the lake began to heal in small, visible ways. Neighbors waved again instead of turning away. Tom Martinez repaired his dock without fear of a citation. Children played on the Garcias' swing set, laughter floating across the water unchallenged. It was fragile, tentative, but it was hope. Still, shadows lingered. I returned from town one evening to find tire tracks carved deep into my drive, too fresh to be coincidence. Another night, an envelope slid under my door contained only a photo of Robert shaking hands with a county judge. The message was clear: his reach wasn't gone yet. But the law was catching up faster than intimidation could hold ground. Federal indictments stacked against the Cromwells: wire fraud, extortion, tax evasion, conspiracy. The charges read like the contents page of a criminal codebook. One morning, Agent Torres joined me on the porch, steaming coffee in hand. "Daniel, you should know something," she said. "The evidence you provided didn't just expose Clearwater Lake. It's connected to at least 4 other counties. The FBI is preparing a coordinated sweep. When this breaks, it won't be one HOA president falling, it'll be a network collapsing." I let the words sink in. All the long nights cataloging violations, all the fear, all the anger, it hadn't been in vain. Pop used to say electricity always seeks the path of least resistance, but justice takes the hardest road possible. The day of the Cromwell's arraignment, the courthouse steps overflowed with neighbors, reporters, and federal agents. Delilah emerged first, shackled but still trying to shout about persecution. Robert followed, red-faced, flanked by attorneys who looked more exhausted than confident. Cameras flashed, voices shouted. I stood in the crowd, unseen among dozens of others who'd lived under their reign. For once, it wasn't just my fight. It was everyone's. And as the Cromwells were loaded into separate vans, Mrs. Patterson slipped her hand into mine. "We've got our lake back," she whispered, tears cutting lines down her cheeks. I looked at the courthouse doors closing behind the FBI and prosecutors, then out toward the horizon where Clearwater Lake shimmered in the morning sun. For the first time in months, the air felt clean. But even in victory, a question pulsed at the back of my mind, sharp as the brick that had shattered my porch. How many more communities were still living under their own Cromwells, waiting for someone stubborn enough to fight back? The trials moved faster than anyone expected. Federal prosecutors laid out the Cromwells' empire piece by piece, falsified storm claims, shell companies, intimidation campaigns, even the sham improvement fund that had siphoned hundreds of thousands from ordinary families. Watching the evidence projected on courtroom screens felt surreal. Pages I had once spread across Pop's oak table now glowed under fluorescent lights while jurors scribbled notes. Neighbors testified one after another. Mr. Peterson spoke quietly about his marigolds ripped from their boxes. The Garcias detailed how they'd nearly gone bankrupt paying for lake improvements that never happened. Mrs. Patterson, voice trembling but resolute, recounted the night Delilah threatened her over non-compliant shutters. Each story layered on the next, a chorus of intimidation and loss. Delilah tried to keep her composure, but under cross-examination she unraveled. The footage of her midnight sabotage, the screwdriver, the wire cutters, the glow of my camera played on a courtroom monitor. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Her attorney stammered about misunderstandings, but the jury's faces hardened like stone. Robert fared no better. Bank records tied his campaign account to development firms that had swooped in after families were forced out. Emails showed him feeding zoning maps to investors weeks before Delilah launched her harassment campaigns. When the prosecutor asked why a political treasurer's family trust had ballooned by $500,000 in 2 years, Robert's only answer was silence. The sentences came down heavy. Delilah, 3 years in federal prison, $340,000 restitution, and a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA board in the United States. Robert, 18 months for conspiracy and abuse of office, plus ethics violations that ended his career permanently. The Cromwell name, once whispered with intimidation, was now synonymous with disgrace. The HOA itself dissolved within weeks. In its place, the community voted to form the Clearwater Lake Volunteer Association. No fines, no forced fees, no power-drunk presidents, just neighbors pitching in to mow common paths, fix docks, and host barbecues. The difference was night and day. For the first time in months, I sat on my porch without looking over my shoulder. Children's laughter carried across the water again. Boats drifted without fear of citations. Neighbors stopped by with pies and beers instead of whispers and apologies. A letter arrived from the Attorney General's office informing me I would receive whistleblower compensation from recovered funds, $45,000, enough to repair Pop's septic system, restore his old boat, and even start a scholarship in his name for kids entering the trades. I cried when I opened that envelope, not for the money, but for what it meant that our fight had been seen, valued, and vindicated. The ripple effects spread beyond our lake. Other communities, emboldened by the Cromwell's downfall, came forward with their own stories. A network of HOA dictators and their political backers began to unravel across the state. Our little lake had become ground zero for reform, but the sweetest victories were small. Mrs. Patterson moved back from Florida and hosted a block party on her first weekend home. Tom Martinez and his wife, once afraid to wave hello, now organized fishing tournaments. Even the Garcias, once on the brink of losing everything, planted a new garden by the shoreline. Life returned, stubborn and resilient. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the lake gold, I sat with Jake on the porch steps. We cracked open 2 beers and watched the light shimmer on the water. "You realize you didn't just save your cabin," he said. "You saved all of us." I shook my head. "We saved each other. I just happened to be too stubborn to fold." Still, in the quiet moments, the memory of that brick lingered. The scrawled warning, the midnight photo through my window, the whispered threats they haunted the edges of victory. Because for every Cromwell caught, I knew there were others still out there, running the same playbook on different lakes, in different towns. And as the fireflies blinked in the dusk, I wondered not if justice had been served here, but whether other communities would find their own stubborn soul willing to fight back. The months that followed felt like stepping out of a storm cellar after a tornado. Everything was still standing, but nothing looked the same. Our lake, once a battlefield of citations and threats, began to resemble what Pop always said it was meant to be: a refuge. The media attention didn't fade quickly. Channel 7 returned, this time not to vilify me, but to run a feature called "From Victim to Whistleblower: How One Man Took Down HOA Corruption." National outlets picked up the story too. Suddenly, Clearwater Lake was on the map, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof that even ordinary people could expose organized fraud. Netflix producers even showed up with cameras, pitching a documentary about HOA hell and the Cromwell Empire. I laughed at first, but when I realized the project would fund a new guest cabin for families fighting their own HOA battles, I signed on. If our misery could light the way for others, it was worth reliving every painful detail. With part of the whistleblower reward, I started the Pop's Legacy Scholarship $500 grants for local kids heading into trade school. Pop always believed honest work with your hands was the backbone of a good life, and now his belief would carry forward into the next generation. Watching the first recipient, a nervous 17-year-old with calloused palms, accept that check made me prouder than anything else. Our community, once fractured, knitted itself back together. The Clearwater Lake Festival returned, this time bigger than ever. Proceeds went to veterans' housing programs and rebuilding docks for families who'd been forced out. The laughter of children on the Garcia's swing set, the smell of barbecue drifting across the water, the hum of boats at sunset, it all felt like reclaiming something Delilah had tried to steal but never truly owned. Yet beneath the joy, I carried a question like a stone in my pocket. As neighbors celebrated, I kept wondering how many other communities were still living under their own Cromwells. The FBI's final report mentioned over 24 related cases in 5 states. We had one here, but the war stretched far wider. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the lake burn gold in the setting sun. My solar panels hummed, the repaired septic gurgled quietly underground, and Pop's old boat bobbed at the dock, patched and proud. For the first time in a year, I felt peace, but I also knew peace is fragile. The Cromwells had been brought down, but corruption is like electricity. It always seeks a new path. Somewhere, another HOA president was taping a notice to someone else's door, convinced they were untouchable. I leaned back in Pop's chair, listening to the loons call across the water, and asked myself the question that still echoes tonight. If your community was next, if the Cromwells came for your home, your land, your legacy, would you fight back, or would you let them drive you out?